Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Foundations Live. I'm Paul, I'm Director of Foundations, and it's very good to have you here. Well, it's sunny here. Please do continue putting any comments in the chat, particularly if you've got any questions for any of our guests this afternoon. We'll pick those up as we go through the afternoon and pop the questions on the screen and post them to our guests as well. So just a few introductions and bits and pieces in case you haven't been to a Foundations Live event before. We're the national body for disabled facilities grants and home improvement agencies in England, and we're funded by the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. We're here to help with training events, workshops, and things like today. So all the details are at our website at foundations.uk.com. There's a variety of ways that you can join us on Foundations Live. I think most of you are on our website and viewing through the website, but you can also watch on a variety of social channels. So you can join on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter or X. And if you're looking for closed captions, you can find those on both LinkedIn and YouTube. I think they're actually on Facebook as well. So if you're looking for closed captions, you can find those there. So our agenda for this month's Foundations Live is going to say a little bit about the DFG Summit we're holding in June this year in a moment. And we've got a presentation on the Housing Health and Safety rating system. Then we're going to look at wallboarding and alternatives to tiling as a way of cutting down on kind of damp and mould in bathrooms, very much linked to the HHSRS, that one. And then to round off the afternoon, we're going to look at the design of adapted kitchens. So a lot of this is based on two new guides that we have on the website, which you can find at foundations.uk.com/guides. There's close to 30 different guides on various things related to home improvement agencies and DFGs. So if you haven't been there already, I very much recommend checking that out. So as I said, we're going to be doing another summit, which will be in June this year. So it follows up on the summit we did last year. Last year, we were looking at issues around the assessment part of the DFG process, and we had a number of workshops and plenary sessions going into some detail, looking at developing solutions, collaboratively kind of co-producing solutions around some of the issues around assessment. And if you've been coming to roadshows or webinars and Foundations Live over the last few months, you'll have seen some of the things we developed on the back of that summit. And this year, we felt that there was other topics that we needed to address, and one that came to the top of the list was around DFGs for children, particularly kind of the complex DFGs for children that lots of areas, lots of professionals struggle with, and particularly some key issues around how you deal with those, both in terms of funding, deciding what's necessary and appropriate, different types of adaptations, sometimes around autism and behaviours of concern. So we've got a full day where we're going to have some plenary sessions and a number of workshops co-producing some solutions that should improve the delivery of DFGs for children over the next few years. We had a really good time last year, very, very productive day. And I think it's lining up to be an equally productive day this year. We've got some guest speakers, including Luke Clements, who's a professor at Leeds University and has done a lot of work around the kind of benefits of adapting for children and kind of savings on social care. And we've also got CEO of the Royal College of OTs that's going to come and talk about the kind of profession's perspective on adaptations for children as well. So really good day. There are a couple of early bird tickets remaining. The link's now in the chat. But yeah, we're looking to have a kind of fantastic day in June, 27th of June. The venue is right next to Birmingham New Street Station and the Bullring, so really easy to get to, really nice venue as well. And if any of you are in Birmingham for the Foo Fighters, it's the same day as the Foo Fighters gig at Villa Park, but we're really looking forward to having a good day, so it'd be great to see many of you there. I'll be rock up to Birmingham in June. Right, so our first presentation of the day, we're going to move on to looking at housing health and safety rating system, and I'm pleased to welcome Gordon Hinchcliffe, who used to work for Foundations many years ago, in fact back before I started, and has been delivering HHSRS training for, must be getting on for 20 years, Gordon?
17 years.
Okay, get in there. Yeah. I don't remember, but I did do the course in one day in Birmingham, probably about 17 years ago. So it'd be good to get a refresher this afternoon, and yeah. I'll hand over to you then, Gordon, to take us through the HHSRS. And as I say, there is a new guide on our website that gives you some details, and we've got Gordon provides training. I'll share the details of that when Gordon's been through the presentation.
Okay. Right, so I have control of the slides, it would appear. So, good afternoon. Some of you may have seen me before, as I've been delivering courses on the HHSRS rating system as Paul just said, for at least 17 years. But for those who haven't seen me before, my name's Gordon Hinchcliffe. I worked for Foundations from the year 2000, when they first got the contract, until 2010 in roles of development support, regional manager, development support team manager, and at one time deputy director. But throughout that time, I had a training and development background and have been delivering the HHSRS, delivering courses on the HHSRS since its inception in the year 2006, delivering it directly on behalf of Foundations, and then since 2010 delivering it for Foundations on an associate basis. So HHSRS, what is it? Let's go. What we'll be looking at today, certainly the origins and the purpose of the HHSRS. The HHSRS, its underlying principles and the assessment process, and a little bit, if I've got time at the end, to tell you about the future of the HHSRS. There's quite a few changes coming around the HHSRS, and also related to the Decent Home Standard as well. Significant changes that will have quite an impact on the private rented sector. So, where do we start? Well, it starts way back in 2001, the Decent Home Standard. There's no reason you should have a real understanding of the Decent Home Standard. It was a very important thing at the time. It was introduced by the then Labour government, and it was driven by an associated public service agreement, PSA 7. That basically said that by the year 2011, 10 years after its introduction, all social housing should be decent by 2011. You can see here that it's got very much a social housing background at this time. That, of course, is not the case now. It's very much a major player within the HHSRS. Is very much a major player within the private rented sector. It had 4 broad criterion A, B, C, and D. And it's criterion A that is important for the HHSRS. Criterion A is that to be decent, a property must meet the current minimum standard for housing. And because time's tight, I'm not going to go through the criterions B, C, and D, but I'm going to go straight on to what is meant by the minimum standard for housing. Initially, 2001 to 2006, That standard, the minimum standard for housing, was the housing fitness standard. This is something that had been in place for some 50 years before. It was the way in which the conditions of properties had been measured prior to that time. And there is a very good reason that over those first 5 years of the Decent Home Standard, it still was in place. And I haven't got time to explain that full reason, but but with the implementation of Part 1 of the Housing Act 2004, from April 2006, the HHSRS was used as the basis for the minimum standard for housing. So HHSRS is a risk assessment process, and it's not in itself a standard. The idea of the standard in relation to the minimum standard for housing comes with the statement that a hazard score of 999 points. Just very, very briefly, the HHSRS produces a score that can range from 0 way up into the tens of thousands. But a hazard score of 999 of up to 999 points based on the risk assessment process was adopted as the minimum level of acceptable risk for properties. 1,000 points and above was seen as a category 1 hazard. And this is a term that is one of the key terms within the housing health and safety rating system. So through the risk assessment process carried out by the HHSRS, if the score that is given through that assessment process is above 1,000 points, then it's considered to be a category 1 hazard. And if it's a category 1 hazard, then the property is non-decent. It says in the Decent Homes Guidance that to be decent, a dwelling should be free of category 1 hazards. And the existence of such hazards should be the trigger for remedial action, unless practical steps cannot be taken without disproportionate expense and disruption. So in effect, the minimum standard for housing is that it must be free of category 1 hazards, and it's the HHSRS that measures this. Now, this is going back a long time. This is going back some 17 years or so. While the Decent Home Standard is far less important than it was when it was introduced, and indeed since it's been introduced, it's only ever applied to the social housing sector. The HHSRS that came out of the Decent Home Standard has established itself as a very important tool within the housing sector, particularly the private rented housing sector. The Housing Act, Part 1, 2004, bestows upon local authorities a mandatory duty to act when one or more category 1 hazards are identified in domestic properties. It also bestows upon them the discretion to act when 2 or more significant, high scoring, that is, category 2 hazards are identified within the property. Now, it's this statement, this link with the Housing Act, Part 1, 2004, that is really the essence of the HHSRS. Around the country, around every local authority, there will be an environmental health department. Within that environmental health department, there will be enforcement officers. Now, these enforcement officers responding to complaints from tenants, particularly within the private rented sector, but sometimes within the social housing sector. So in response to complaints from tenants that their landlord, that the landlord isn't listening to any complaints they're making, the environmental health officers will visit the property and carry out an HHSRS assessment. In the event that that HHSRS assessment identifies a category 1 hazard, or as it says on the paragraph below that, 2 or more significant category 2 hazards, then it will place upon that landlord an enforcement notice. That enforcement notice can take many different forms. I haven't fully time to go into them, but the enforcement notice, particularly if it's an improvement notice, will ensure or attempt to ensure that that landlord addresses the category 1 hazard, removes the category 1 by carrying out a program of works and removing that category 1 hazard, thus making the property decent again. And that, in essence, is really the driving point. This is the sharp end of the HHSRS. As it says at the bottom here, the powers are primarily used against private landlords, but in some cases against social landlords, and where they've received complaints from the tenants. That, as I say, is the sharp end of the HHSRS. But it has grown over the 17-year period as a very, very useful tool across the whole of the housing sector. Of course, I'm talking to home people mainly from the home improvement agency backgrounds here. The home improvement agency sector uses the HHSRS as a justification for financial help from local authorities for their clients, whether that help is in the form of a social loan or possibly a grant if they're still available. And it uses the HHSRS because those social loans or those grants are usually dependent upon it addressing a category 1 within the property of the client. So in other words, the money will be available, the financial support will be available for the client if there is if the issue being dealt with within the property is represented by a category 1 hazard. Also across other sectors, the RSLs, registered social landlords, the social housing sector, will use the HHSRS and the Decent Home Standard for stock condition purposes and to identify responsive repairs and planned maintenance programs across their housing stock. One of the things that I'm coming across more and more during the delivery of the HHSRS training is the number of schemes throughout the country addressing homelessness. I've trained hundreds of people from Manchester and the London boroughs and Sandwell. I've just started a course last week where there are some people from Sandwell who have got homelessness schemes. These schemes use the HHSRS to assess the condition of properties prior to adopting those properties for their clients. The hazards that are identified by the HHSRS are the basis, and also the hazards identified by the HHSRS are the basis of criteria used to determine fitness in the homes brackets Fitness for Human Habitation Act 2018. And again, this is a new piece of legislation whereby tenants can actually take their landlords directly to court without the intervention of the local authority enforcement officers, can actually take their landlords directly to court. And the HHSRS is one of the key factors in determining whether they have a case. Okay, right. Oh, something's missing there. That's right. Okay. Quickly go through some of the underlying principles. What I'm doing now is something that takes me usually 6 hours to do. So I'm going to try and get this into 5 or 7 minutes or so. First things first, the HHSRS evaluates the potential risk to the health and safety from any deficiencies that are identified within the dwelling. This emphasises the point that I've made earlier on, that this is a risk assessment process. Risk assessment is something you may or may not be familiar with. Perhaps the most likely experience you've had of risk assessment might be health and safety at work. That uses a risk assessment process. But risk assessment is founded on the logical evaluation of the likelihood of an occurrence. How likely is it that something will happen, something negative will happen, that could cause harm, and the probable severity of that outcome. So risk assessment, we're looking at 2 factors, likelihood and harm. To illustrate that, I've produced a little slide. in my original presentation, that slide built up, but let's take it from what we've got on the screen. Here we're looking at it in a sort of graph format. On one parameter, on one axis of the graph, we have the we have harm, from minimal harm, bumps and bruises, coughs and sneezes, up to extreme harm, death, potentially the death of the occupant due to some occurrence within the property. And on the x-axis, God, I've forgotten my maths here, but we have the likelihood scale, from very, very low likelihoods, a chance in a million, up to a very high chance, an accident waiting to happen, very, very likely, it's going to happen. So we have these two scales, harm and likelihood, and we assess both the likelihood of an occurrence happening and the harm of an occurrence happening. And in simple terms, this gives an escalating measurement of risk. I'm showing it here as a traffic light system. It's not currently a traffic light system in the HHSRS, although I understand that it is something that's going to be introduced. But where we have lower levels of harm and low levels of likelihood, we have a low level of risk. Higher levels of harm and higher levels of likelihood, we have medium risk. And the high levels of risk, as measured by the HHSRS, by the risk assessment process of the HHSRS, is where we have high levels of likelihood and high levels of extreme levels of harm. So, risk assessment process. Keep skipping a slide here. Right, okay. So it relies on the professional judgment to provide a simple means of representing the severity, excuse me, go back there, representing the severity of any danger in the dwelling. This issue of professional judgment is basically what my course is about. It's about developing the professional judgment that allows people to carry out the assessment process. And it's something, and it's an ongoing process. People will, at the end of my courses, will understand the process and be at the process of developing their professional judgment, but it's something that will continue as they gain more experience of it. HHSRS is evidence-based. What we have here is an example of of a data table from something that is referred to as the operating guidance. The operating guidance is the Bible of the HHSRS, and following following a lot of research that was carried out, albeit at the end of the 20th century, 1995, 1996 sort of times, huge amount of research was done into the risks associated with the property, and data such as this has been used as the basis for the HHSRS in the and is the basis of the assessment process. There are 29 hazards. We haven't got time to go through each one of these as individuals. I've listed all 29 hazards. I've also highlighted in red some of the hazards which are far more prevalent. These are the ones that, as I'm delivering the course and as I'm talking to people who are carrying out the HHSRS, these are the ones that I'm seeing time and time again. Some of the other ones, I have to say, even after 17 years, I haven't seen some of these hazards. So there is very much a skew to a top 10 of hazards in the HHSRS. I might just have time to get through this. I'm going to do an assessment literally within 2 minutes, something that would take far longer. Here we have a worked example. We have a hazard, falls on stairs. We have a number of deficiencies in here. If I had more time, I would ask you to identify them. But there's uneven treads and rises, no top landing. There's not a particularly effective handrail here, a rather badly designed front gate, plus there's no lighting in this particular property. There's a whole set of reasons that is probably going to increase the likelihood of a fall, and in some cases, if the fall is onto these hard areas, increase the potential harm as a result of the fall. So consequently, we're looking at a potentially high level of risk for the hazard related to falls on stairs. We're going to assess this by, let me just go back. We're going to assess this by using this form. Again, a very complex looking form, but it's something which is easily explainable, not within the time scale that I've got now. But on this form, we will then look at the data associated with the hazard, falls on stairs. The property is a 1930s property built between 1920 and 45. And I have data here for the average likelihood of a fall, 1 in 226, and the classes of harm, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Haven't explained the classes of harm, but here is the data in percentage terms of the potential of 2.1% potential of a class 1 harm occurring, that there may be death. Down at the other end, where we've got 70% probability that the outcome may be bumps and bruises in this particular instance. I use the data from the table. To annotate the scoring sheet. There's the average likelihood. Here are the average spread of harms. From that point, I now make an assessment. How much more likely is it that there's going to be a fall in this property? How much are we going to increase the likelihood? And there are, this is where the professional judgment comes in. But in my professional judgment, I would expect it to be increased from the average of 1 in 226 up to a figure of 1 in 18. I now look at the spread of harms. These tend not to be moved too much in the assessment process, but we look at them from the point of view of, there we go. We look at them from the point of view of where does the average place them on these scales and what is the midpoint in these scales. And we have figures of 2.2, 4.6, 2.2, 4.6 and 21.5, or 10 and 21.5. So I'm going to use these figures of 1 in 18. These figures I've established from the spread of harms, which comes from the average likelihoods. And we finish up on a scoring sheet with a score of 3,505. This is expressed as a Category 1 Band B hazard, which would require enforcement action. But in any case, it means the property is non-decent. It means there's a significant risk within the property, and that, whatever the circumstances, should be addressed. I'm aware that I've filled my 15 minutes with a massive amount of information, which requires far more explanation. I'm not going to have time to fully go through the review, other than to say is that the HHSRS has been reviewed. It's gone through a review process, and the results of that, the impact of that review will be seen possibly next year, maybe possibly later this year, maybe next year, but the HHSRS will go under some significant changes. It won't change in its methodology, but it will change in some of the detail around the considerations when carrying out the HHSRS process. One final thing is that, and I'm just going on to that, I started with the Decent Home Standard, said that the Decent Home Standard has, since its inception in 2001, only been relevant to the social housing sector. At the same time, the new HHSRS is introduced. The Decent Home Standard, following a review of its standards, will apply across the private rented sector. That in itself will have a big impact. Those two things together, the changes in the HHSRS, the implementation of the Decent Home Standard within the private rented sector, will have a huge impact upon the way the standards of properties are assessed. I've tried to put too much in there within that particular time scale. Are there any questions at this point in time?
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. So first one from Jules. So are the likelihoods in operating guidance, I suppose, is still representative, given that a lot's changed since the 90s?
Yeah. Yeah, I know where this question is coming from. I did say that it was based upon data from 1995, 96. And there was it was part of the review process that they made. In actual fact, I don't think the review process is going to change the data. And I think the honest answer to this question is, I think in some cases the data is not relevant. It is not. It's arguable that the data is a little bit out of date and is perhaps not relevant to today's housing circumstances, but considered to be sufficiently relevant to continue using it.
Thank you. And you did go on to mention that some of the kind of coming up changes. But what do you think will be?
Yeah,
crystal ball thing. What do you think
I would like to. What do you think the major changes are?
Yeah, well I suppose what would you like to see change?
The major changes are, or one of the main things is that there is a much tighter. There's going to be a much tighter training regime to support the HHSRS. That in itself is of great interest to me because I've been doing this for 17 years, but there will be a much tighter training regime, particularly for the environmental health officers, how it impacts upon those carrying out enforcement using the HHSRS. I'm not sure how much this training regime will affect them. But other than that, the main impact seems to be that there will be new operating guidance, and the hazards, currently 29 hazards, will be reduced to 21 hazards. Certainly the extent of the changes in the HHSRS are much less than was proposed at the outset of the review, which was back in 2018.
Why do you think it's taken so long? It's kind of 6 years, isn't it? So what do you think has held up the changes or kind of the review?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
I was just thinking it's kind of quite a long time since 2018.
Hello?
I just wondered if you had any views on what had held up the review. Are you struggling to hear me, Gordon?
Certainly, I paid a lot of attention to the review, and I would love to sort of bring up all the slides and information that I've got, but I'm aware that other people have got to get the time in. There was a lot of there was a lot of changes proposed back in 2018, just in terms of the timescale since then. Incidentally, we have had COVID. I think that probably got in the way of the review process. But there was a lot of changes that were proposed during the review process, which in actual fact haven't been implemented. I haven't seen the full version of the review. There is only there is on the government website, there is a briefing document that was put on in September 2003, which is basically a summary of the changes. And it's only 3 or 4 pages long, but that summary will give you a good overview of the proposed changes that are going to come into place.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon, Gordon. Very, very much appreciate it. And as you kind of mentioned, there's more training coming up. So we do have a new course on the 21st to the 24th of May on Housing Health and Safety Rating System, where you can learn from Gordon how to, I suppose, kind of how to understand those 29 hazards and how to apply the all that kind of calculation and kind of that kind of professional judgment. So I'll stand to put the link in the chat, and if you're interested in booking a place, you can find all the details either following that link or on the website later. So thank you, Gordon. So now I suppose, as I was kind of talked about, one of the main hazards is kind of damp and mold, and quite a lot of that happens in bathrooms. So now I'm going to introduce Gareth. Hi, Gareth from Multi-Panel, who's going to take us through, I suppose, an alternative to tiling, kind of a new way of, I suppose, probably not that new actually, is it? But an alternative to tiling using wallboarding in bathrooms, or I suppose in any room potentially. So over to you, Gareth, and if you give me a nudge, I'll move the slides along.
Hi, Paul. You're at the end at the moment. Can you write it back to the beginning? Keep going, keep going, keep going. Thanks very much. Yeah, my name's Gareth Humphreys. I'm the Specification Manager West for Grant Westfield. We manufacture wall panels, and here today to talk about alternatives to tiling in a bathroom. Can you move forward, Paul, please? Why are we here today? Well, we're looking at a vital strategy of reducing mold in bathrooms. We'll go on to talk about wall panels, waterproof wall panels, who Grant Westfield are, and really looking at the sustainability and a case study of how we've helped improve bathroom surroundings in less able environments. Really, damp and mold pose significant challenges in maintaining a safe and healthy living environment for everybody, especially in areas of high moisture. So bathrooms are really relevant to where we are. So really retrofitting a bathroom with moisture-resistant panels presents a proactive approach to preventing the occurrence of mold and really presenting the bathroom with a better environment for the end user. It can also help you comply with any recent legislation that's been introduced, and really make everybody's life a lot easier. Can you push it on, please, Paul? So the threat of damp will really thrive in high humidity areas. Really, the lack of ventilation is an issue, but really the accumulation of moisture and grout of tiles is one of the major problems, and where the black mold does occur. Left unnoticed, it not only poses health risks to the user, but also jeopardizes the structure of the walls of the bathroom, and increasing the cost of maintenance over the years. Move it on. There are some, in rental properties, and that includes social landlords, there are some legal obligations that under the Fitness for Homes Act of 2018, all landlords are responsible for providing habitable living. And this relates to what Gordon was talking about earlier on for their tenants. But really, this should really be employed for anybody that is a householder, whether it be a tenant or they own their own property. And obviously, we in Grant Westfield view any retrofitting of a bathroom or renovation of a bathroom, whether it be an adaptation or a straightforward upgrade, to use this process to reduce the occurrence of mold. So really, moisture-resistant solutions such as wall paneling can fulfill the duty of care under the regulations. And really, it's also come occurs after the tragic death of the toddler, Anwab, who died from mold exposure back in 2020. And really, his law has now been incorporated into the Social Housing Regulations Act of 2023. And it's really one of the biggest reforms to social housing in the last 10 years. If you can push it on. Vital strategy still continued. The role of wall panels. We can provide a seamless wall waterproof barrier, which, unlike traditional tiling, prevents moisture ingress. We can minimize the disruption when we make the adaptation to the user, as it takes roughly a fifth of the time to renovate a bathroom with wall panels than it does with traditional tiling. We can have the bathroom ready for use in 24 hours, and the cost saving can be as much as £30 a square meter on the installation. There's a little chart there that shows where we actually score better against traditional tiles. And as you can see all the way down the chart, ticks on the panel, only one tick to the traditional tiling method. Why choose wall panels? Well, it's suitable for any lifetime homes project. Well, really, when you're building a house these days, they employ lifetime homes where they're looking at reasons for changing the layout of certain rooms in the house. If there's a change of occupancy, change of circumstances, change of ability. So really, it fits into the way that a new house is going to do it. It allows any retrofit to follow the same principles. The panels that we produce have a flexibility on sizes, so it makes for easy installation for a one-man fit, which many contractors tend to use these days. We have in our armory a thing called a hydrolock joint. Now this is a tongue and groove joint which allows two panels to be joined very similar to click flooring, but on the wall. It in itself is a watertight joint, but it gives a seamless approach to the walls. All our panels have a 30-year warranty, and the company Grant Westfield has been in existence for over 30 years producing these panels. So it is a proven warranty that we're offering. In 2023, we installed as a company over 1 million square foot of multi-panel. Just goes to show how popular it can be right across the board, from adaptation right up to upgrades of high-end bathrooms. It provides a quick, easy, waterproof solution to a bathroom. Click it on, please. Who are Grant Westfield? Well, we're a house of brands. We have two brands. There's multi-panel, which predominantly historically has been used in bathrooms, and a newly introduced brand called Nature Panel, which is really our first venture away from bathrooms into the rest of the house. And there's no reason why our panel can't be used anywhere in a home. And we have done some cost calculations to show that Nature Panel can provide a wall covering cheaper than wallpaper. Carry on. We've also done an extensive research in sustainability. All our panels are FSC certified. Thus, the Forestry Stewardship Council allows us to track all the history of our panels. It also, we are a Made in Britain member, so all the panels are actually made in Edinburgh and transported through our own transport. And we have an EPD calculation, that's the environmental protection product declaration, that shows us to be 50 times better than tiles in what we do in a carbon footprint. So sustainability is inbred into Grant Westfield. Little case study that really applies to a new build, but it was for an accessible living complex back in Cwmbran in South Wales. We had a brief from the occupational therapist there that they wanted to incorporate the 30-point visual impairment index on the light reflected variance panels. So we came up with suggestions on the type of panels they should be using to give that to meet that standard. And 4 years down the line, we had a report back from the building manager that says no repairs have been needed on the paneling. They've worn well and they kept their appearance and look new as they were the day they were fitted. Effective cleaning is easy because all you need to use to clean the panels is the shower gel that you actually use to wash your body. No specialist cleaning is needed for them. Push it on, please. And really, more information can be gained from our website. There's product information, articles, case studies, everything you need to know on why you should choose multi-panel. We have a nationwide network of sales and business development managers that support everyone in the specification process, including our specification team. And we also provide installers with an on-demand installation guidance through Multi-Panel University, where we can give 5 short videos to explain the best way to install multi-panel and give the best appearance in the end. moving on. Yeah. And now happy to take the questions that's came across.
Great, thanks, Gareth. So let's, we've got the link to your website in the chat. So
Yep.
Jennifer's asked a couple of questions. So I think you can mention that they have a 30-year guarantee.
30-year warranty. We've been producing them for over 30 years. So as the longer we produce them, the bigger the warranty will increase, because we don't get deterioration, as in the case study there. After 4 years in a very high demand assisted living complex, they still got every appearance as being as new. Best way to seal the holes after removing fixings. Well, there are specialist people out there that'll fix the holes, but we would suggest that as long as the holes are sealed, and you could use mirror screws for, if cost was an implication, are sealed properly, it won't deteriorate the core of the panel. But I would suggest you look at the specialist repairers. In fact, we've got one sample that we use. We've got in this exhibition I'm at today, where we've purposely drilled holes into it and had one of these magic repair people to repair it, and you won't see the difference. They'll be repaired the same way as you would marks in a kitchen worktop.
So how do you kind of go about fitting them down in terms of, I suppose, kind of making sure you've got strength to take things like shower seats and grab bars afterwards?
Well, the panels in itself will take a screw. Obviously, you would treat it in the same way as you would with tiles. You'd have to put some sort of support for longer screws behind the panels, because the panels are only 11 mil thick. But they do take a screw. They don't deteriorate, and there's no pullback and no pull through. As long as you treat it exactly the same way as you would with tiles, same for grab rails, you won't have any deterioration on the panels.
Great. As you know, we've kind of been going around the country on the road shows talking about bathroom design. For those, any of you on the call who've been, you probably know that there's certainly increasing number of local authorities that are using wall panels over tiling these days. Is that a trend? Obviously, you must be seeing as well.
Yeah, I do a lot of work in the frameworks right across the country, and some of the larger social landlords in my patch. I've got Birmingham and Sandwell. They both actually use multi-panel in as opposed to tiles. The cost of the product is slightly more expensive than tiles. But what we did when we priced this for adaptations and for social housing, we looked at the price that is already allocated for supply and fit for tiles, and our panels fit within that. If you take the cost of fitting, bearing in mind there's no specialist fitter needed, and the time it takes to make the installation, as I say, is a fifth of the time you would for traditional tiles. So there's where the costs come in. And really, you're looking at to fit tiles, it's about the allowances between 35 and 52 pounds a square meter, wherever you are in the country. The cost of fitting a multi-panel shouldn't be more than 15 pounds a square meter.
Great.
So there's where you have.
And it's kind of something that people with kind of, I suppose, kind of standard toolkits, kind of saws.
Yeah, easily fitted. The best person, in my opinion, the best person to fit a multi-panel would be a carpenter. But anybody with multi-trade experiences, which are really in the private sector and in the social housing sector at the moment, one person can actually fit a bathroom in a day, and get it back in. And standard tools, standard hand tools. No specialist tools are needed for it.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Gareth. Look forward to seeing you at the next roadshow. If
anybody's got any queries, please visit the website, or even contact Paul. He's got my email address, and we'll be happy to assist and help out where we can. Yeah, I think there's a couple of comments in the chat as well, Gareth. So if you want to go back, I'll pick up with that. Yeah, and Jennifer, that'd be perfect. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Great. Thank you. So, just before we move on to our final guest of the day.
Just a reminder for future Foundations Live, if you want to join us on any of the social media channels, you're very welcome to join us there. And this whole Foundations Live event will also be on demand on the website for a few days as well. So if anybody wants to catch up on it or get their friends to catch up on it, then they can do that as well. Right, so we want to move on to the final session of the day.
Foundations Live.
So pleased to welcome Stuart Fern from AKW, who's helped us to develop a new guide that's on our website around kitchen design. That's very much based on some work that Stuart and his colleagues have done at AKW. So I'll add your slides to the stage, Stuart, and hand over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul. Thanks. Yeah, my name's Stuart Fern. I'm one of the regional directors of sales for AKW. As Paul said, we've been working on a accessible kitchen design brochure based on wheelchair users, and we're going to I'm just going to cover some of the fundamentals on the designs on this one. You can download it via the website there. I'm sure the links will go over on the side as well. You can email our marketing, or you can talk to any of our business development managers as well, and they'll be able to sort you out with as many copies as you need. Whoops. Okay, so I mean, the kitchen is normally described as sort of the hub of the home, if you like, but it is quite often overlooked within adaptations where, you know, priority might be given to bathrooms and other areas of the house. Partly because, you know, a lot of the time they expect, you know, if it's multiple occupancy, they'll expect other people to do the cooking. You know, and they're quite an expense as well. It might just need a lower bit of worktop in certain areas, but it is, you know, it's an integral space really within the house for family contact, social interaction. So really, it should be considered just as important to be able to access it from all family members and the user themselves. So there are some key questions really when designing a kitchen. So, you know, how is the kitchen currently used, and is it by all family members or just one person? Is it going to change in the future? Is the person's condition going to change? Is it going to need further changes to be made later down the line? So thinking about future proofing. What space is needed to make sure that you've got adequate thoroughfare? So do you need to potentially move doors, move access points, to make sure that you've got enough space in the kitchen for somebody to be able to have adequate turning circles? What appliances are necessary? What do they use at the moment? Do they use an oven, a hob? You know, it might be now air fryers, toasters, microwaves, everything really, taking that into account as well. Obviously, with a wheelchair accessible kitchen, quite often you're taking out a lot of storage space underneath units so people can get closer to the worktops. So, you know, you've got to find that elsewhere and other alternatives for that. And also how much workspace is required. A lot of the time we're dealing with fairly small kitchens, so it's making the most out of the space that we have available. So we work really with a person, occupation, environment model of practice. And that allows you then to sort of look in detail of exactly what's needed of that individual and the rest of their household if relevant. So the client is the person that we need to observe and understand their requirements, what skills they have, what skills they potentially don't have, and what barriers they currently have within that environment that we need to modify. The environment, I mean, that includes the building, the area that you're working on. So not only the construction as to whether you can, things like you can move doorways and things like that, but also to take into account heating, to take into account lighting as well within that environment. And then lastly, the occupation, which is who's going to be using the kitchen. Potentially, is it going to be a child that wants to develop their cooking skills? Is it going to be an adult, an older person who wants to be able to make a sandwich and a drink of an evening without having to be reliant on a carer? So when you sort of overlap those areas, that gives you that occupational performance area, which is where you can influence the design. So working on to layout really with that, you should always avoid, and we see quite a few where kitchens have been designed where you have a wheelchair user, maybe a hob one side, a sink the other, where they've got to carry across hot pans, hot food. You want to avoid that wherever you can by trying to allow for a continuous length of worktop, so somebody can actually move an item along it rather than carrying anything across. As I've said there about doorways as well, try and create that easy thoroughfare so you're not getting in the way of people. It's not going to cause any potential accidents or slips or anything in the kitchen. So some potential pros and cons of layouts, of common layouts that you would see. So a one-sided kitchen is great. You can have two people working next to each other. So you can have somebody there who's able to give, assistance. It also gives you plenty of space behind as well. So plenty of room for people to maneuver around. Might be slightly lacking depending on the size of the kitchen, on worktop space, on what you need to, where you can actually operate. The next one is a two-sided kitchen, so like a galley type kitchen, where you've still got the same benefits of that one-sided, but also you've got worktop space. It's not always ideal because potentially, you might be lifting heavy items from one side to the other. You then have a U-shaped kitchen. So objects on this can be moved right the way along the worktop. Gives really easy wheelchair access as well. But again, it can be restricted depending on the size of the area you have available, because you're going to be restricting the turning circle if it's a small kitchen. And then finally, you have an L-shaped kitchen, which is probably one of the better options, because again, you can move items along the worktop. You haven't got to lift anything. People can have independent workstations on there, and you get plenty of room for wheelchairs and turning circles on there. So we suggest a 1.5 by 1.5 meter circulation space to be able to move around between floor facing units, or it might be a unit between the unit and the wall as well. It makes sure that then you've got plenty of space there. You haven't got you've got a lot of room to maneuver. One thing to take into account though is actually where we produce kitchens, we do a very deep recessed plinth. So potentially if you've got a plinth that's recessed 300 mil either side of the kitchen on that U-shaped one, it actually gives you an extra 600 mil, because that plinth will take into account the foot plate of the chair, but also their feet as well. So it proves really, really useful where you've got restricted spaces to have that increased size of plinth. Onto worktops. One of the first things to decide is what sort of worktop, if it's going to be just a single individual user, where they'll always want a standard height worktop, maybe slightly lower, or whether you've got multiple users and you need a rise and fall unit. Obviously, rise and fall units have changed over the years, when they used to have crank handles, if anyone remembers, and looked like they were designed by JCB. They're now operated by two really easy to use buttons. It's important to think about where those controls are located. And normally on sort of the dominant side, so somebody has got no problem using it. The one we've got there, that picture doesn't show a vanity panel. Sometimes it's great to cover up pipe work and things like that, because if you've got pipe work, if you've got electrical cabling at the back of the unit, then there's always that potential that somebody could get caught in it with the wheelchair, get anything caught on it. So you can have a vanity panel. Something to obviously consider with that on the other side is that if you've got a vanity panel there, has that person still got enough space to be able to draw himself closer to the unit? One thing, people put hobs into them. You can see we've got a hob there with a kettle. You can put sinks in them, are very common as well. One thing to consider with a sink is to use a shallow bowl sink. So not only does that give additional space underneath the worktop, but also it means that somebody hasn't got to lean further forward to get the last teaspoon out the bottom of the sink. And always with sinks as well, to have a heat pad on the bottom, so it doesn't then, if it's lowered down and on top of somebody's legs where they haven't got any sensation, potentially you're burning somebody with the heat transfer from the water. So always put a heat pad as well underneath the sink. Appliances, the best oven to use. If anybody watches Bake Off, Neff brought out their slide and hide oven, not particularly for our industry and our needs, but it's been an absolute fantastic product. It's one where it's a front opening oven that comes down, but also the door slides underneath the oven, so it keeps that hot surface right out the way. So a fantastic product. But also side opening doors are very good as well. Make sure that it's an oven that has either left or right, so that can be adjusted depending on where it needs to be positioned. We always line up as well. We always recommend that you line up the most commonly used shelf in the oven almost level with the worktop, so you can take something out. You're not lifting, you're not reaching up to take a hot lasagna out of the oven and then bringing it back down again to get it onto the worktop. So it's almost an even height. You can even take it out onto a heat-proof tray in front of the oven maybe, and then reposition to put it onto the worktop. Always telescopic rails rather than the ones the sort of metal trays that just slide in to grooves in the oven. To have telescopic rails fitted so that the shelf can come out, you get plenty of access to it, and it's not going to tip forward and run the risk of scalding or burning somebody on it. Appliances, induction hobs are by far the best option. They can be a little bit more expensive. A lot of the time it used to be that saucepans weren't always induction hob ready, so a lot of people had to change saucepans to use it. A lot more now on the market. Most saucepans that I think you can get are sort of induction friendly. You can actually buy things through Amazon and eBay that's like a plate that you can put a saucepan onto that turns it into an induction pan as well. They are great because they're really, really easy to clean. Obviously, they're totally flat on top. They turn off and don't activate if there's not a saucepan detected by it. And they've got a really low temperature after use, so they cool down really, really quickly. So reduce that risk of burn injuries. Obviously, we'd never recommend a gas hob, because if somebody's leaning over to get a pan, you've got an open flame there. That's the same reason as well with front controls, if you can, on a hob. So nobody's leaning across. You've got a risk of knocking a saucepan over. Always try and get a hob with remote controls at the front. A little thought as well, microwaves, they predominantly come left-hand hinged. So when you're thinking about designing the kitchen, making sure that that's taken into account, so they're not going, having to travel back out around the door of the microwave or whatever to get to the worktop. And because we're losing, so much storage space is taken from underneath the units, you've still got to have that, access to those. And okay, it's in wall units. It used to be the case that you'd have the old style pull down baskets, if people remember them, very sort of rickety. They'd shake and knock everything off as they pulled down. And when you let go, you fire your beans up through your kitchen ceiling. The range that we have now are, they're adjustable. You can adjust the tension in them to suit the tenant, exactly to suit, their abilities to be able to pull it down. So they pull down really smoothly, nice solid units. But we also do, as we have in the image there, an electrically operated rise and fall cupboard that not only comes down, but it comes forward. So it comes forward diagonally to the front of the worktop. So you get plenty of access to that. Comes with the up and down buttons, which can be located wherever you want them, or remote controlled as well. So you can have it on a remote controlled option. Gives you full access to the store cupboards. A few of the last sort of finishing touches. One thing we introduced last year was the grabber rail, which a lot of you might be familiar with. If you come into a house that's been adapted, normally you have grab rails. You can take them from the garden right through the hallway, into the lounge, into the bathroom. The only place it's really difficult to put one in the past has always been the kitchen. So the grabber rail sits underneath the worktop, gives a really good support rail. So if they're in a wheelchair but are able to sort of stand and want to support themselves, for a while. It's great for that. It's great as well to be able to allow wheelchair users to be able to pull themselves closer to the work surface. So it's a really good product for that. Very, very simple, but I think a lot of the best ideas normally are. Lighting is a real consideration. Always use as much natural light as possible, but obviously you're not going to get that at night time. So it's always good to consider, you know, what the lighting is, what the standard lighting is in the kitchen, and whether you could utilize task focused lighting, maybe on certain areas. If somebody's used to making a cup of tea of an evening, highlight that, you know, sort of a tea area, highlight the sink, maybe even inside cupboards and things like that, or inside drawers. Color contrasting as well is very good to keep, you know, certain products, if they need to be, if somebody has got visual impairment, then to keep it within the light reflective value to enhance the visibility of certain items. And obviously flooring, a lot of the time, you know, if it is somebody who's ambulant, or if they're able to, you know, stand in the kitchen or walk through it, then obviously it needs to be non-slip flooring in there as well. So I've sort of flown through a lot of the items there. Where we are now at a stage when, you know, you can actually see a fully adapted kitchen there. But actually it's a nice looking adapted kitchen. I'd have no problem with having one of those in my house if my kitchen was big enough. But it does sort of cover all the things there. Get a copy of the guide, because everything's sort of detailed in there as well. With some really good, you know, features and bits that we pick up on. And obviously we have a free of charge surveying service as well, if ever anybody needed one. Thanks ever so much for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Stuart. I think there were, so let's have a look. So Jennifer was asking about what happens if something goes wrong with the adjustable light worktop.
Nothing goes wrong with them. What go wrong with our worktops? How dare you, Jennifer?
I suppose if somebody got a carrot or something stuck in it, who'd come out and fix it?
So we have if it's one of our worktops, we have our own internal engineers. So we have, you know, a nationwide AKW engineers. If ever there is a problem, we're out within 72 hours. I think we run at about 40 hours at the moment. If it does go wrong, I mean, we don't get a lot of issues with them. Sometimes it will be water access or something like that. So, you know, it might be a case where we've been out, and if water's got down the back onto the control box, then we'd sort that. We'd replace the control box, and we'd make recommendations about where to put it for the future as well. So anything like that, you can get in touch with our technical team and they would run through it.
Okay. And Jennifer's got a lot of questions this afternoon. So is there a little AKW badge somewhere on them, so that if somebody goes back years later, they know where to go to their parts?
I'm pretty sure there is. We normally leave as well, you know, details and you know, within the fitting instructions of things that's got our details on there. We can trace back invoices from, you know, from sort of 10 years ago, I think, on some of them. So yeah, there are AKW logos. I believe they're inside the cupboards as well.
Great. So, thank you, Stuart. As you say, the full guide's available via AKW, and we've added a kitchen design guide to our website as well, so that kind of based very much on AKW's guide. So for anybody who's interested, you can also find it at foundations.uk.com. So thank you, Stuart. Thank you to Gordon, and thank you to Gareth as well for joining us this afternoon. So yeah, thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all for joining us. Just a couple of reminders that coming soon, we've got two DFG Champions Roadshows left of the tour. So we'll be in Manchester, we'll be in Newcastle, got the wrong place. We'll be in Newcastle next week, and we'll be in Manchester a little bit after Easter to finish off the current round of roadshows. We've got the DFG Children's Summit on the 27th of June. Be great to see you there for that. And we've also got 3 more Foundations live events coming up in April, May and June. So in April, we'll be looking at some of the DFG case law that exists, and kind of going through what that means for your practice and your decision making. And we'll also be looking at adaptations in the private rented sector. In May, we'll have an author of done some new research on improvements in housing, and we'll have the authors of a new book on delivering home adaptations. And then in June, we're going to look at kind of system build extensions for DFGs. So either system builds that you kind of crane in or flat pack extensions. And we'll also have an update on the work that we've been doing around behaviours of concern. So that'll be our Foundations live events for the next 3 months. So as I said at the start, we're a national body for DFGs and HIA, so we're here to help us, funded by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Good to see you all this afternoon. If you want to watch it again, this is available on demand on the website, plus across social media, and the individual sections will be up on YouTube later in the week. So if you want CPD certificate for viewing today and learning today, you can go to foundations.uk.com/webinar feedback and leave us your feedback, leave your email address, and we'll send you a CPD certificate for 1.5 hours if you need one of those for the end of the year. And we're going to get your feedback as well. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We'll wrap up there and hope to see you again next time. Thank you all.